Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to the LA Public Library for hosting this incredible event. I wanted to kick us off by offering a grounding, really just a framework through which to think about this conversation. I think it can be really, really easy to fall into a trap when we talk about paid family leave, when we talk about maternity leave, paternity leave. We start to get mired in the details, politics, policy, and we often forget that at its core, paid leave it's a statement on our vulnerability. It's an acknowledgement that we humans go through periods of time in which we experience profound vulnerability, change, transition. And I think that there's no more relevant example of just how vulnerable we can become than this pandemic, which continues to rage throughout the United States and around the world. And so what I hope to offer in this mindset shift is just an invitation to approach paid leave from the perspective of curiosity, from the perspective of acknowledging that every single one of us is subject to vulnerability, to transition, to change. Every single one of us experiences vulnerability in our humanity, and that this conversation is really rooted in that, in an acknowledgement of every single human going through a period of vulnerability in their lives, and a question that exists, which is, how do we care for one another when we are at our most vulnerable? So I hope that can be a framework through which we see this particular conversation, and we're excited to get started. So back to Bridget.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to LA Public Library and Maternal Mental Health Now for putting on this wonderful event. So as was mentioned earlier, my name is Bridget Shea, the Senior Campaign Manager for Paid Leave for the US. And I'm happy to be here today to help guide the discussion on how paid family leave can support maternal mental health. And thank you to Jaclyn and Stephanie to be here today to share your stories and to connect with folks watching. And the reality is that today's moms are facing extraordinary times. We're still in the midst of a pandemic, with moms and our communities of color carrying much of the burden of the fallout of the virus. In September, of the 1.1 million people who exited the workforce, over 86% of them were women, many of whom left to take care of their children. And the coronavirus has amplified what we already know to be true, which is that the health and our families and the economy rely on the ability for moms, for women to have support when they need it. And paid leave policies are a part of that support puzzle. There are many reasons why someone may need to take paid leave, either to care for themselves, provide caregiving for a loved one, or welcome a new child. And the reality is it's about being there for the moments that matter. And today we're going to focus our discussion on how paid leave can improve maternal mental health outcomes through storytelling and a discussion on paid family leave rights. So with that, Jaclyn, I know you're passionate about social justice, but you came to paid leave through a personal experience. Can you share with us today?
Yes, I can. So my family's experience with paid leave has multiple chapters. The first chapter actually was about 5 years ago this month, when my husband and I welcomed a healthy baby boy. And after a pretty, textbook pregnancy with its, various complications, but, pretty much a straightforward pregnancy experience, when I gave birth, from the moment I went into labor, everything just started to go wrong. So for the first 6 weeks of our son's life, it was just one thing after another, between breastfeeding not working properly, the sleep deprivation, constantly having to go to the doctor, my body not recovering the way that we expected it would. And add on top of that, the sleep deprivation and hormonal shifts. There was a really profound sense that just nothing was good in that early postpartum period. And at about 6 weeks, I had one of those nights where just 3 o'clock in the morning, everything just sort of comes crashing down. And thank God my husband was able to identify that something was really wrong and took me to the doctor the next morning. And it was there that I received a formal diagnosis of severe postpartum depression. The severe part was because I had expressed suicidal ideation, which meant that my treatment plan was pretty intense. And luckily, I had great health insurance. I had access to the doctors and the medications and the treatments that I needed. And most importantly, I had 12 weeks of fully paid leave where I could recover in private. At the time, I was the only female rabbi at the largest synagogue in the Pacific Northwest, which meant that I was in a really highly visible role. I was very public facing. And I was so terrified that somebody from the congregation was going to find out what was going on with me. And so the ability to recover in private without the additional anxiety of being down a paycheck, having to go back to work before I was ready, the financial strain was just so much lessened, which meant that I was able to recover and get back to myself in a really sort of shockingly quick amount of time. I look back and I think without a hesitation that my ability to have paid leave to recover without the anxiety of being down financially or more financially, because as we all know, it is quite costly to have a baby in this country, and anywhere. It's a costly experience. But I really believe that having paid leave was the difference between life and death for my family. So that was part one. Part two, which I'm not going to focus on as much today because this is about maternal mental health. About 2 years after my own recovery, my husband developed epilepsy and came out of the blue, as most health crises do. And our experience of both assessing what had caused his first seizure, how to treat it, how to move forward was completely different because for many different reasons, we did not have access to paid family leave. And I can tell you that the experience that we had when my son was born versus when my husband first began having seizures, I cannot even begin to describe how different those experiences were. And the common thread was paid leave. So for me, my husband and I, we've become activists around paid leave, around maternal health, mental health. And for us, it's deeply personal. And for me as a rabbi, it's become a deeply spiritual experience as well. So that's why I'm here today. That's why I'm honored to be speaking and sharing my story.
Thank you so much. And, one thing I just wanted to ask and maybe tease out a little bit more is I can imagine that there are many women that, feel connected to that of being in a workplace, or maybe they don't feel like they have a peer that they can go to with questions to find out their rights, or even mentor them on how to talk to, a supervisor who may also not know the challenges that women face because they're not a woman. How is that like to try to, find like the strength and like start that conversation so you can access the time that you needed?
That's a really good question. I think that first and foremost, I mean, everything that we do, no matter our profession, it comes down to relationships. It comes down to having a connection that goes beyond just the functional, right? I need something from you, you need something from me. We work on a project together. When we work alongside other people, and often we work in a hierarchical structure, that can sometimes be a little bit difficult. But in my case, most synagogues don't have HR departments. Most synagogues are structured a little bit differently than I would say most other businesses. But there still exists that hierarchical structure, and what makes it just so much more functional when it comes to what you just said, Bridget, is having relationships with your colleagues that extends beyond work, knowing a little bit about them knowing a little bit about you. So that when you enter into these conversations, there can be just a little bit of a step forward in terms of a dynamic, in terms of trust, in terms of just being able to speak openly. And we all know that we can't always speak super openly with our supervisors or with the people with whom we work. And that's why it's also really good to have advocates around you who can help guide you, language you, way to approach. My husband and I are very big believers in mentorship. We both have many people that we call on for guidance. And so in addition to having that dynamic, just also knowing that you are not alone and that it is perfectly okay to reach out to others can only help, especially when you're about to prepare for a major transition like welcoming a baby.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I love that word transition. Stephanie, we're doing transition now, but Stephanie, I know that you have also used that word a lot about this time in your life. And I know, it's not only something that you have experience with, you're kind of in the middle right now of preparing for your second child in a few weeks. Congratulations again. And thank you for taking the time in what I'm sure is a very hectic time. But I think that's a unique, perspective. And I was wondering if you can share a little about your paid leave experience on your firstborn and really how it helped during this transition.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm Stephanie, everyone. Thank you to the Los Angeles Public Library and Maternal Mental Health Now for bringing this very important topic to the forefront for us to be able to share through storytelling. Thank you, Jaclyn. I appreciated hearing your story as a mother. I thank you, Bridget. You mentioned I'm in the middle. I'm actually on the tail end and beginning. I'm 38 weeks pregnant, which means that baby girl could come at any moment now. She could come today, but I don't know when she will come because babies come when babies come. I am happily married to my husband of 4 years. We got pregnant 3 years ago. I have my toddler. It was a first experience of trying to conceive, just coming up with the idea of even being ready to start a family. We were a relatively active couple. We had traveled and done so many things together. We were at a point in our relationship where we decided that we were ready. So getting pregnant with my son, we had a completely surprise gender experience. So throughout the entire pregnancy, we didn't know the gender. We wanted it to just be our baby. So that was the idea that we had in mind in welcoming him or her into our lives. It turns out he was a boy. We gave birth at a birth center, had a completely natural birth. I was definitely prepared for having like this very idyllic experience of birth being like this beautiful, magical experience that would be somewhat perfect because I had prepared and I had taken, pretty intense classes through Bradley Method. They're 12-week long classes. So I felt really prepared. And yet on the other end of things, I was researching paid family leave and how that was going to go, and was really surprised to hear that, being in California, we're one of the unique states that actually has a paid family leave program, but was a little disappointed to hear about the amount of time that was allowed. In retrospect, I was looking at just this comparative, looking at around the world, what was offered to women and families. So being that, I was a working mother, I knew for sure I wanted to take the minimum amount of time. I didn't realize that once my son was here, just how much of an angst I had to take the full grasp of it, to really like soak in motherhood. It is such a transformation. I had never been a mother before. I was a woman for my whole life, so I knew that role really well. I knew what it meant to be a wife. I knew that role. I just didn't know what it would take out of me to become a mother. And so in that dynamic, there was incredible shifts happening in my heart, in my psyche. It just impacted my ability to want to go back to work. So I knew once I took the time, it was just this clock that was ticking to me, and it was never enough. So I had a lot of thoughts of anxiety. I was pretty nervous about leaving my son. Being a mental health professional, I knew that there could be a marker where it was no longer considered part of baby blues, where it was no longer considered normal. And yet I had never experienced this before. So I was really wrestling with, is this normal or is it just me? I had some mom guilt because, why me? What did I do to bring this on? Is there something that I could have done differently? How did I not prepare for this? I prepared for everything else. So finally, I spoke with a doctor who was very supportive about me attending a group with other moms. And we attended this group together. We talked, we shared, and a lot of it was just normalizing our experience together and bringing it to light, bringing it to air so that we weren't alone. And that was what I think truly made the difference in taking that leave, was not feeling that rush anymore of having to go back and not looking at the calendar, letting it go, and just accessing what was readily available to me so that I could heal for my son and for our family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that, focus on healing for like the mother. And I think that's important to kind of like lift up this other aspect that I know your family is really passionate about, which is the ability to have your husband there or to have like your non-birthing partner there. And the ability for them to take paid time off can also be a support. One thing that strikes me is that many fathers who may be eligible to take paid leave don't take it. How key was it to your recovery that your husband was also there and able to take the time?
Thank you for bringing that up. Fathers, partners, spouses, plus ones, whoever your other support is in the home is absolutely, in my opinion, it was essential to my healing and recovery. It involved having someone tell me, you know what? It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not feel okay right now. And what can I do to help? What can I get for you? And sometimes that was bringing me water while I was breastfeeding at all hours of the night, and making snacks or asking if I had showered that day. It's the simple things, I think, that really, when you're a mother for the first time and possibly going through postpartum depression or anxiety, a lot of the self-care kind of goes out the window because you're so focused and consumed by your own thoughts, the rumination, the things that are occupying your head, the things that sound so simple. Brushing your teeth can be astronomically difficult to do. So I think having my husband there, not only support for me, but also for him and my son to bond together in a way that I think has just incredible ripple effects in their relationship today. My son couldn't talk, but they were reading together. They were doing things together that really shared a bond that they have carried through. And I think some of that has to do with that, the 0 to 1 is a very important time for an infant of building trust versus mistrust in the world. And if you have fathers involved in that very foundational landscape of love, of building trust, then you have the father growing as well as the infant. And they're building trust from such an early time in their life. So it really strengthens the family, I think, as a whole, for him to be there.
That's wonderful. And it's beautiful. Jaclyn, I know you mentioned, your husband was also, involved, and he was really crucial in kind of noticing maybe some of the early, signs, but I was wondering if you can dive into this as well.
Absolutely. My husband really saved my life, and I tell him that often, maybe not as often as I should, but he knows. And when the when the roles were reversed and he got sick and I was put into the caretaker role, I also just saw what he went through when I was sick from a very different perspective. So we've been through a lot as a couple and as a family. But just to add to what Stephanie said, I think, it's often portrayed in movies and TV shows and media that like the transformation that happens often when one is, blessed to have a baby or adopt a child, like that it's really the mother who goes through the experience. Like that's something that we have been conditioned to see in many different ways. And the reality is that welcoming a child, however that child is welcomed into the world and into a family unit, the child is welcomed into a family unit, and family units all look different. And sometimes parents are single parents. Sometimes they are married. Sometimes they are partnered. Sometimes they are in homosexual relationships, heterosexual relationships. There's a wide variety of families. But the point is that a baby is welcomed into a family dynamic that is really important because it transforms the entire family unit. My husband often talks about how it was our family's postpartum depression journey. And in the beginning, I got a little salty about that because I thought, well, I was the one who was sick and I wasn't on you. But the reality is it was our family's experience, and it did impact our son, even though he was a newborn. And I think it's just really important to acknowledge that fathers, partners, wives, grandparents, that there are so many different people who make up the family system. And to be able to have paid leave for the caretaker is important because it is such a huge transition, not just for the birthing parent. And that's something that we've lived through a few times now. So, yeah.
Thank you both for lifting that up. That pretty much kind of gets us to, I think some of the meat of why folks are here, which is like, what is it that we have? We talked about California being in the first of the nation, but what does that really mean when you're preparing to welcome a new child? Before heading off to our slow slides, I do want to just ask one more question to help kind of close a little bit on this conversation. So like Stephanie, I know you mentioned that you're a mental health professional. How do you think specifically pay leave helped with PPD or PPA?
So definitely, I would say identification of risk factors is first and foremost very important to preemptively plan ahead, just like we plan to meet with our OB or midwives along the way. We should be having conversations about our mental health and how we're feeling while the baby is still in the womb. So having a plan in place, looking at risk factors, talking about your own relationship with your mother, or your relationship with your father. Those kind of things can often trigger some symptoms to come up in mothers, because it is a time of so much emotional transformation. So those are opportunities to really get the conversation going. And then after we talk about risk factors, we want to definitely look at protective factors. So what are the things in your life that light you up? Your favorite scents, someone, maybe one or two people that you can identify as people that you can add to your care team. Maybe even looking up a therapist in your area. I know Maternal Mental Health Now has a great directory. You can plug in your zip code and look up someone just to have on standby, just the same way that you would have your lactation consultant, on standby. And it really absolutely adds to your toolbox of things that you can access to build your village as a new mom. It's very essential to have that. And those are the things that are going to really reduce, risk. But just because you do all that and you still get postpartum depression and anxiety doesn't mean you did anything wrong at the same time. There are a lot of things that go into effect that are beyond just, the mental health aspect, the emotional, there's the physical as well. So it doesn't mean that it's not treatable. It's definitely treatable. And in my case, I accessed group therapy. It was very powerful for me to sit with other women. So I think reducing stigma is also part of what we can do, to really advocate for everyone to access this kind of support.
Thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So you should be seeing now a slide where we're going to go over paid family leave and other benefits that you may have here in California that you can access when you need it the most. So let me take a look here. All right. So, what we know that, access to paid maternity leave that includes job protections has been shown to reduce rates of postpartum depression, but not just in the immediate, it also reduces rates of depression later in life. At this crucial moment in a woman's life, she can experience challenges at birth, learning to care for an infant, and navigating the additional challenges that arise in doing so. We just heard from Stephanie and Jaclyn about their personal stories in doing that, and I'm sure it resonated with folks who are watching today. A Harvard study actually found that not only do mental health outcomes improve in that short term, like I was talking about, but that women who take paid leave are 18% less likely to suffer from depression 30 years later. And actually, a California study that was looking at our law from 2000 to 2012 found that with the enactment of paid leave, it showed that access associated with it was associated with a 27.6% decrease in post-psychological distress, and symptoms among mothers with infants saw a 9.1% reduction in mild PPD. And populations that typically lacked access to paid family leave, particularly single and younger mothers, saw a larger impact as well. And also, overall, economic outcomes improve when there's good paid leave policy that support women and families and center on care that allow women to stay in the workforce. Also reducing that financial stress that I think a lot of folks are feeling, especially nowadays, about their jobs. But really, I want to kind of pause here and talk about how it can help address gender and racial disparities. So we can't have this discussion without acknowledging the impact on gender and racial disparities. Black women can experience higher rates of depression compared to their white counterparts. And along with Latinos, they're more likely to be the primary or sole head of household or top wage earner. Paid family leave is part of the equation when thinking about improving economic security, family health, and well-being. Jaclyn, I know that, earlier I said that you are really passionate about social justice, and I was wondering if you can also talk to this about this as well.
Definitely. I was just thinking about how when you become a mother for the first time, Stephanie, I think you said it really beautifully. Like before you became a mother, you knew how to be a woman, you knew how to be a daughter, a friend, maybe a sister, like you knew how to wear these different hats. But then when you become a mother, your whole worldview just completely shifts, and you realize there's so much that I didn't know or didn't understand or maybe didn't fully absorb before this experience. And in addition to that, for me, one of the things that was really, really powerful and sort of shocking was having to reconcile our privilege when we became parents and started to go through the motions of treatment for postpartum depression. And then we were reading up on the statistics that showed us that even though what we were going through was horrific, we were actually in a category where we had a tremendous amount of privilege due to circumstances beyond our control, the families that we happen to be born into. And knowing that, and knowing the statistics around Black women, around infant and maternal mortality in communities of color, accessibility, doctors, treatment plans, health insurance, that was the thing that actually really just transformed our thinking around this and made us realize that my husband and I have a responsibility to be activists around this, not just for people who look like us, who come from a similar background as us, but for people who don't have the same platform, for people who don't have the same accessibility. It also really became apparent to me once I got better and once I was able to really look behind me and say, okay, I think I'm doing a lot better. I feel like myself again. I think I'm through this. It became really clear to me that I had to start preaching about it. That as a rabbi, as somebody who has devoted her life to the Jewish community and to God and to a higher purpose, that this was going to become part of my my rabbinate, or, you know, to borrow a term from the Christian world, my ministry. And so I went from, I don't want anybody to know about this, like this cannot be spoken about ever, to, I mean, clearly I'm on this today. Like, you know, there was a transformation where I said, I have an obligation to talk about this, because my speaking up and my sharing my story means that it makes it okay for other people who don't have the same platform that I do to seek treatment, to push for their own rights, to push for their own treatment, to have the allyship that they deserve. And so for me, that's an act of social justice. For me, that's something that is very much a part of my rabbi identity, my rabbinic identity. And it's something that I continue to be deeply and profoundly aware of. And so thank you for bringing that up. And I know that when we were doing the meeting before this, when we were talking about what we want to bring up, I remember saying, I really want to talk about this because it's so important to the conversation, and it shapes who we are going to be as we go through these transitions in life.
Right. Thank you. And Stephanie, I know you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so glad that you're talking about this. Being a woman of color myself, a Latina woman, Mexican American, raised by a single mother, I really have dedicated a lot to making mama proud. I think it was awesome. And then at the same token, I had dealt with a lot of guilt in, you know, having in some ways like let her down, or, you know, that I wasn't rising to the occasion of being, you know, a strong mother. I think we have these really strong you know, cultural identities that shape us. And in certain families, it's very taboo to talk about maternal mental health, that being something in my family. So it's taken me a lot to get to a place where I'm obviously talking in front of all of you. I'm a mental health professional. I'm bearing, you know, my soul here for the purpose of the greater good of breaking down, you know, this really ugly secret that it's that it affects only certain people, because it affects a lot of people from various socioeconomic backgrounds. And I'm glad that Jaclyn talked about, while it does impact the different socioeconomic status folks, it definitely plays out differently in how those folks access treatment, access care. Me having worked in the field of insurance, being a mental health professional, it was still difficult to navigate the treatment process. So that's not that is an issue, you know, that is definitely a barrier when we talk about access. And I did read a statistic about how, you know, while over half of the women are in the workforce, 23% of moms actually go back to work within 10 days of giving birth. I don't even think we stop like having the physical symptoms happen. So I just wanted to bring that up, you know, being that in my experience, yes, I was privileged in a Fortune 500 company. I had health insurance through my husband. It was excellent, but it was still hard. So we have so much more work to do to bring these resources to people for them to know that they're available.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's find out, what is it? What is it that is available? So what we know, let's go to what we have. 1 second. My slide is not moving, but it will move now. Perfect. All right, so what types of leave may you be eligible for? I think what is sometimes challenging here in California is, although we were like the first in the nation to have it, we didn't just have one law. What we commonly think of as paid family leave is actually a few different laws that are interacting with each other at times to provide benefits. I would think of it in two buckets. I would think of it as benefits that provide job protection and benefits that provide wage replacement. We're going to spend a lot of our time talking about paid family leave, which is the wage replacement portion. But I wanted to go over the graph below because it's a nice look provided by some wonderful folks over at Legal Aid at Work. And I'll make sure you have these resources. It's a nice look of how these laws and these benefits typically interact with each other. And don't worry if you have a question or you want to find out a specific answer. I'm going to make sure to walk you through and make sure, like I said, you have those links. So, so this graphic illustrates kind of like the common timeline for new mothers who are eligible for benefits. The top portion is job protection, meaning that not only is your job secure while you take time off, but that you won't face discrimination when you return. So that can mean, you're taking time off and then you come back and you're not in a different shift or a different position that's lower paid. And what we're looking at here is PDL, which is pregnancy disability leave. So with PDL, you're eligible 4 weeks before your birth to take time off, depending on, what you need for your medical condition. Maybe you have severe morning sickness, maybe your doctor wants you off for other reasons. So you have that 4 weeks before to be able to, take care of yourself and take that job protected leave. Additionally, still looking at PDL on the top, you have 6 weeks for a normal birth, quote unquote, maybe normal birth, and 8 weeks if you end up having a C-section in order to recover. So this is saying you are disabled because you need to recover from having your child. Within that time, you could be eligible for SDI in order to get the pay portion, the wage replacement. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that when we go to paid family leave, because if you're eligible for paid family leave, those eligibilities, you're probably, also eligible for SDI. Now, once that period is up of recovery, either 6 weeks or 8 weeks, on the example that you see on the screen, it's 6 weeks. You're also eligible for job protected bonding leave through the California Family Recovery Act. So that is up to 12 weeks of job protected leave. Within that period of time, you are also eligible or could potentially be eligible for wage replacement, which is up to 8 weeks in order to bond with your baby. Perfect. Oops. So what is the California paid family leave? So it provides partial wage replacements to California workers who take time off to care for their seriously ill family member or to bond with a new child. And this also includes newly fostered or adopted children. So in order to be eligible, you have to be a part-time or full-time employee who contributes to SDI through a state-mandated payroll deduction in the past 5 to 18 months, the base in which they do the calculation, and make at least a minimum of $300 within that time that deductions were withheld. So the easiest way to check that you could potentially be eligible is to check your paycheck stub. So you'll see SASDI, which shows that deductions are being withheld. This is a benefit that we all pay for. We pay a little to make sure that it's there when we need it the most. Folks who commonly may not be paying into this may be public employees or independent contractors. For independent contractors, there is something that you can elect to contribute to, which is the Disability Insurance Elective Coverage Program. One thing I just really wanted to note is that your citizenship and immigration status do not affect eligibility. You're really looking at the CASDI. So when can you take time? So if you're a parent who will lose wages while taking time off of work to bond with a new child, again, through birth, adoption, or foster care placement, that is when you can take the time. Or if you need to take care for a seriously ill family member, like a child, a parent-in-law, grandparent, grandchild, sibling, spouse, or registered domestic partner. I kind of want to really highlight that one because, I think both of our wonderful storytellers today talked about how important it is for moms to be able to be supported by someone in their family. Stephanie, I know we've talked before, and I think you had a phrase of, you need to find your folks, right, that can help out. So if you're a mom who needs additional support in order to recover, maybe you went through a difficult birth or you are suffering through PPD, you have the ability to have somebody support you as long as they're able to also meet these eligibility requirements. Another part is that this time can be split over a 12-month period. You don't need to take all the time at once. You can take it intermittently within that year in order to bond with your new child. In terms of how much will PFL pay, it pays up to 8 weeks of partial pay, 60% or 70%. It's not really a range in between. 70%, I would imagine, is a lower 1/3 if you're making on the income scale close to minimum wage. So it'll pay that of your weekly salary with a max of $1,300 per week. One thing I want to mention is it's so important to be able to kind of keep checking in terms of your rights here. This was actually something that changed recently. Before, you're eligible for 6 weeks of partial pay, and in July, a new law was implemented that gave you the 8 weeks. So even if you had a child a couple of years ago and you feel like you need to know the program really well, still take that moment to get a refresher and to really understand what rights may be eligible to you right now. Your employer may allow you to use vacation, sick, PTO, or other types of leave that you receive in order to supplement and reach 100% worth of your pay. The important thing to note about this is definitely this program isn't meant to give you anything above 100% wage replacement. So it's really important that you talk to HR, talk to your work to make sure to see if you can receive that and then what that looks like for you. And I think one of the things that we talked about is this is a vulnerable time. There's a lot of stuff going on in order to prepare. These are not necessarily the easiest calculations to make. So EDD, which administers the program here in California, does have a lot of resources for you. I have one on the bottom. They actually have a calculator in order to help calculate how much wage replacement that you can expect. So that way you can just build that in and know what you have to depend on going forward. So here's the big thing as well. Earlier on the first slide, we said, what we're talking about, what really helps is, making sure that that your job is protected. It's not a great time to have financial stress and not knowing if you can go back and be able to pick up and meet your goals financially, be financially healthy. So there is a Job Protection Act that I showed on that first screen that can help if you're eligible. So the California Family Rights Act gives Californians the right to take job protected leave to care for one of their own or for a family member's serious health condition or to bond with a new child. You must work for an employer that has at least 5 employees as of January 1st. So again, this is a new benefit that was enhanced recently and a good reason why to keep in touch with what's going on in the paid family leave world. Family includes child, parent, spouse, or registered domestic partner with a serious health condition under the existing law. And then coming in on January 1st are grandparents, grandchildren, siblings, adult children, and parents-in-law. Here, the eligibility is a little different. Here, you have to be at your job for at least a year. So this is where the wage replacement and the job protections don't quite align one-to-one. So you really need to know kind of what things that you have in your arsenal and whether or not you apply. And how do you apply for paid family leave? So you can apply online. I have a link there for you, which is edd.ca.gov. Typically, if you are already receiving SDI benefits for recovery from childbirth, EDD will kind of notify you either through mail in order to continue that into PFL. You can also do it by mail. I have a handy link there if you want to do to access a form. And you just want to make sure that you're prepared. Don't want to, cause any delays or challenges if you don't have to. Make sure you know the name of your employer, the date you want your claim to begin, and documentation showing the proof of the relationship between you and the child. I think particularly that is important if you are a dad or a non-birthing partner who did not have SDI because you are not recovering from childbirth, but want to apply in order to be there to bond later on. So here, if you want to have a deeper dive into what's available, it's a list of handy links. And if we could just drop those in the comments. Thank you. I see those. I'm just going to run through a few. So in the wage replacement bucket, edd.ca.gov is a wonderful resource. They've been doing a lot of work in outreach and materials and making sure folks know what their rights are there. They are the agency that oversees SDI and PFL in order to make sure you do get that wage replacement. And then the Department of Fair, FEA, the Department of Fair Equity and Agency administers the job protection portion. And so they have additional FAQs and tutorials to access. And in the links, I put them in English and in Spanish. Also, Legal Aid at Work, they have a really wonderful pregnancy and my job roadmap and guide available in English, Spanish, and Chinese that will walk you through what we just discussed here today. But they also walk you through other rights that you may have that can help you when you return to work, such as your rights to accommodations, rights to accommodations regarding lactation. And so it's a good handy guide to have in your back pocket. Additionally, California Work and Family Coalition, who was heavily involved in increasing the rights that we talked about, including expanding the job protections to a 5-employee requirement. They have been putting out a lot of good videos in English and Spanish that continue to educate on this. One good thing to mention is, it's always good to not assume that your HR professional knows all the ins and outs. As I mentioned before, it's a complicated weaving of benefits and rights. And so, if you feel that you're being denied, somebody in the workplace is saying that you're not eligible and you feel like you are, or maybe your situation in particular has a lot of variables or different things kind of going on, and you're not really too sure if you are eligible, Legal Aid at Work has a free confidential advice and helpline, which you can access at their webpage, which is also linked in the chat. And if you feel like you've been denied benefits, you can file wage replacement, EDD, and job protections, DFEA. So, one thing I wanted to mention is I know the library had mentioned earlier, like there's a lot of people here today that might not live in California. So welcome you all. And, want to make sure that you have a little bit of a primer on, what you have. So California might have been the first state that offered paid family leave, but they're certainly not the last. Actually, just recently in Colorado, voters voted for this as well. So there are currently 9 states. I'm going to link. I'm going to put in the chat a link to our webpage, which is paidleave.us, all one word, where we have resources that can explain whether or not you live in a state where you have paid leave and where to find out more information on how to access. The other thing is you can talk to your employer about establishing a policy at work. I think why it's so powerful in order to have like a public option and public policy that's available, because I think what we've seen over the few years with economic trends and employer trends is that, typically, although paid family leave is a more common benefit that employers are offering, we're really seeing the rise in that in like white collar jobs, tech jobs, and other work, people who are doing essential jobs for us now during this coronavirus pandemic, they don't have access. So if you want to maybe talk to your employer about like, how do we establish a policy at work, what that could potentially look like, why it's important, if you go to our website, again, linked in the chat, also on this page, we actually have a workshop on how you can start those conversations in order to establish something at your workplace. And then, just a reminder on that, in California, although our paid family leave laws establish a base, certainly employers can offer a more generous package if that's something that they choose to prioritize. All right. Now, I would love to kind of segue into a little bit of a closing, and if we have time, questions and answers. And again, please feel free, if you don't feel comfortable, to utilize all the links that are up there to find out more about your rights. But Jaclyn and Stephanie, as mothers who have gone through this, and Stephanie, again, for you really soon, is there any parting advice that you would give moms who are watching to prepare, not just to welcome their new child, but to also plan to take paid leave for their own maternal mental health outcomes?
Yeah. Oh my goodness, there's a lot to do. Myself, having prepared, to take this, I'm already on leave. I'm on the pregnancy disability leave right now. I actually did some research and found it does not affect your time with baby. So just for those moms that might hesitate to take, the 4 weeks before delivery, because they think that they'll save it up for the baby, take it, because they're completely entitled to it. There is a lot of mental, emotional coping skills that I'm going to be applying, before baby gets here, to really prepare my body, prepare my mind and my heart for her. This is definitely a big change for our family, to go from having 1 child to 2. So there are a lot of things that we need to be really preparing for. besides just, getting the clothes washed, all those little baby tags. There's so many tags on all these newborn clothes, but just getting myself, really prepared to take on this role of not only I've been a mother to my son for 2.5 years, I'm going to be a new mom again. So I have to restart this process because I don't know what that will be like being a mother to her, but she deserves a mother who, takes care of her own mental health, because that's going to make me a stronger mom to raise this little girl. So I owe that to myself. So I encourage other moms to get a village together. I took mommy and me classes. Those are not just for baby, secret. They are for mommy too. So, get your village together, a friend or somebody who you can trust that can tell you, those little code words. So, that things are getting a little bit difficult for you, or you might need a walk. You might need someone to come over and, hold the baby for 30 minutes while you take a real hot shower. Those are things that we need to not see them as necessities, as necessities that happen once in a while, as like a treat or something. We need to really pay attention to how it adds up collectively to help us normalize, the transition that happens each time you become a mother again to a new life.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jaclyn?
I just amen to all of that. And, I was thinking how when I haven't flown in a really long time. I think most of us probably have not been on an airplane in a while. I don't know when we're ever going to be on an airplane again, but I'm sure we can remember that when we're going through the safety video before takeoff, there's that saying, like, put your oxygen mask on first before putting it on somebody else. I might be paraphrasing that, but essentially, like, when you're a new parent, you forget that that is a teaching that needs to hold true, because if you neglect yourself, if you don't put your oxygen mask on yourself first, and if you neglect your own care, you can't put that oxygen mask on your baby. It's just not, when your bucket is empty, you can't give as much to somebody else. And I think all of us, whether we are new moms or moms with more experience, or whatever transition we might be going through, we often forget that we need to take care of ourselves in order to take care of others. And so, again, amen to everything that Stephanie said. And just for every woman, every man, every gender nonconforming individual who is thinking about starting a family, welcoming a child, there's so many resources at your fingertips. And just remember to take them, learn from them. And that old saying, it takes a village, is incredibly true for all of us who are navigating the various peaks and valleys of parenthood.
I'm back. Ladies, thank you so much. That was an amazing amount of information, and also just sincere and heartfelt share about the experiences of motherhood. We've heard over and over again in these various presentations that we've had is that it's not a skill that you just get because you give birth, and then birth can come with complications, and the feelings, the emotional feelings, the postpartum that can come along with that can be daunting. So thank you so much. I haven't seen, I'll just check again very quickly. I don't see that we have questions, just compliments. So I think that this information will be up on our YouTube page, so the presentation can be revisited. And we'll look to be adding these links to our maternal mental health resource page as we grow that work. We really appreciate your time and your presence today and the information that you've shared, and again, the work that you do in this area to broaden the acceptance and the conversation around this. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.